They say betrayal comes from those closest to you. But I never expected mine to arrive with a handshake, in a lawyer's office, while I was hooked up to a chemo drip. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 42, a contemporary artist living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Or I was, before everything fell apart. 3 years ago, I opened Crimson Light, my own art gallery, named after the sunsets that used to flood the adobe walls of my studio. It was my dream, not just to sell my work, but to spotlight up-and-coming artists. Women, queer creatives. People like me who never got the spotlight until they created it themselves. I poured my soul into that space, working 2 side jobs for years, picking up graphic design gigs at night, even teaching workshops on weekends. It took nearly a decade to afford the down payment on that modest storefront tucked in Canyon Road. But when I finally signed the lease, I cried in the middle of the gallery floor. That gallery wasn't just a business. It was my life's work, and I shared it, unwisely, with someone I thought I could trust, Martin. He wasn't my husband, not legally at least. We'd been together for 6 years. He moved in during the height of my career's momentum, when my prints were starting to get picked up by boutique collectors across the Southwest. Martin was charming. He helped me renovate the space, built display panels, sanded old hardwood floors. He offered to manage the finances so I could focus on the art. And when I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer last year, he offered to handle everything. Was grateful. I didn't ask too many questions, didn't look too closely at the business accounts, didn't question when he said we needed to restructure ownership to protect assets during my treatment. I trusted him. But trust is a luxury I can't afford anymore. Started with a strange email, a polite inquiry from a potential buyer, a woman named Corinne, who asked when I'd be vacating the premises. Vacating. Thought it was spam, until my phone rang an hour later. It was Carla, my real estate agent. Breathless, panicked. Rachel, I just heard the gallery's under contract. Did you authorize this? My heart dropped. I was sitting in a sterile recliner at St. Mary's Oncology Center, and 4-line in my left arm. The smell of antiseptic and iron coating my throat. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Martin's signature is on everything, she said. Power of attorney, transfer of ownership, closing dates next Friday. The world blurred around me. The gallery, my gallery, was being sold out from under me, and I hadn't even known. I hung up without another word. My nurse looked at me concerned, but I just closed my eyes and tried not to scream. Martin came that night to the hospital, smiling like nothing was wrong. He brought me a smoothie, kissed my forehead like I was still his. I asked him about the sale, about Corinne, about the contract I'd never signed. And he said, "It's for the best, Rach. The gallery's been bleeding money. You need to focus on your health." I handled it. I stared at him, numb. Handled it. Those were his exact words when he cancelled one of my chemo sessions to take me on a surprise healing retreat. Handled it, like I was some kind of burden that needed managing. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not in front of him. I waited. Smiled weakly. Let him believe I was too broken to fight. But inside something else stirred. A flicker of fire I thought cancer had burned out. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to take back what was mine. And Martin was going to learn exactly who he'd tried to erase. I didn't cry. Not when he slammed the door. Not when the silence settled around my apartment like a heavy fog. And not when I pulled the old cedar box from the closet, where I kept every document that ever mattered, and confirmed what I already knew. The cabin was still legally mine. My hands were steady. Too steady. It was the kind of calm that comes after being broken. The kind that doesn't tremble anymore because the shaking already tore everything down. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark for what felt like hours. No music, no movement, just the faint hum of the refrigerator. And the sound of my breath, like it didn't quite know what to do in the quiet. Because that cabin wasn't just property. It was the last piece of my father. He built that place with his own hands. Laid the stone fireplace one summer when I was 10. Let me pick the paint color for the porch swings, even though I chose sky blue and he hated it. It was ours. And when he passed, it became mine. Not Richard's. Never Richard's. He knew that. He just didn't care. The next morning I took a day off from work. My boss didn't ask why. I think the tone in my voice was enough. I drove 4 hours north, through winding mountain roads and fog-kissed forests, until the pine trees swallowed the highway and gave way to something quieter, older. The moment I stepped out of the car, I smelled it. That familiar blend of wood smoke and moss, and I almost broke. I stood there on the gravel path, looking at the cabin from the outside, just breathing it in, like maybe it could put me back together again. And locked the door. And nothing had changed, except for one thing. There was a pile of boxes in the living room. Half-packed, sloppy. Like someone started clearing things out but couldn't decide what was worth taking. I scanned the room. My father's antique clock was gone. So was the old quilt my grandmother made. And the framed photo of me and my dad on the front porch. T-nail. I clenched my fists so tight my nails left little half-moons in my skin. He hadn't just tried to steal the cabin. He'd started treating it like it was already his. I took out my phone and called the one person who never let me down. Elliot. My best friend since college. Former Marine. Now a private investigator with a voice that could calm a thunderstorm. Rachel. He answered on the second ring like he knew I needed him. He started moving things, I said quietly. From the cabin. Like it was his to begin with. There was a pause. You want me to run a trace? See if he pawned anything. I want to know everything, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Every buyer he contacted. Every lie he told. I want to build a fire under him so hot he won't dare set foot near this place again. Elliot didn't ask for details. He just said, consider it done. And that was the moment I stopped waiting for Richard to do the right thing. That was the moment I started preparing for war. The days that followed were a strange blend of numbness and restless energy. I went through the motions of everyday life. Grocery shopping, replying to work emails, watering the plants in my tiny apartment. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The betrayal. It was a constant hum under my skin, never letting me forget. Every time I passed my bookshelf and caught sight of the old framed photo, the cabin bathed in golden autumn light, my chest tightened. I spent my evenings at the kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing faintly, documents sprawled around me like a battlefield. Mortgage agreements, co-ownership contracts, property deeds. Legalese swam in front of my eyes, but I forced myself to read every word. I had to be sure. No assumptions, no blind spots. It turned out that Richard, in his arrogance, had made several critical mistakes. Laura and I were listed as equal co-owners. Both signatures were required for any transfer of ownership. His forged document was laughably amateur. Misspelled names, mismatched dates. He thought he could bluff his way through. He thought wrong. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew he'd fight back. On Laura's advice, I retained a lawyer. Susan Miller, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in property disputes. He has no legal standing, Susan confirmed after our first meeting, flipping through the papers with quick, decisive hands. But expect him to make this messy. Messy I can handle, I said quietly. I just want my life back. Susan nodded, her expression softening. We'll get there. The support I received from Laura was the glue holding me together. She called daily, sometimes just to chat, sometimes to strategize. She even drove by the cabin to make sure it was still intact, sending me pictures of the porch swing swaying gently in the breeze. "It's still ours," she said one evening. "No matter what he tries." Those words were a bomb. I clung to them when the nights felt too long and the anger threatened to curdle into bitterness. Meanwhile, Richard was eerily silent. No smug text. No calls pretending to smooth things over. It was the quiet before the storm, and I knew better than to mistake it for surrender. I spent hours preparing, printing every email, saving every voicemail, backing up every document in triplicate. I wasn't going into this unarmed. But it wasn't just legal ammunition I was gathering. It was emotional fortification too. I revisited old journals, flipping through pages written in younger, more uncertain handwriting. I read entries about my first nights at the cabin, curled up under heavy quilts with a paperback novel and the crackle of the fireplace for company. I relived moments of laughter with Laura, road trips that ended in muddy boots and tired smiles. The cabin wasn't just property. It was memory. It was peace. It was freedom. And Richard had tried to steal it. Not just the wood and stone, but what it represented. One night, sitting alone with a mug of too strong coffee, I realized something profound. I wasn't fighting for a building. I was fighting for myself. The part of me that refused to be bulldozed. The part of me that knew deep down I deserved better than what Richard had always made me believe. The cabin was a symbol. But the real battle was reclaiming my voice. 2 days later, Susan called. "We're ready to move," she said. "We'll send a cease and desist letter. If he doesn't back down, we escalate." I stared out the window at the streetlights flickering in the gathering dusk. "Let's do it," I said. My hand was steady as I signed the authorization forms. Somewhere deep inside, a long dormant strength stirred. Not a roar, but a quiet, unshakable certainty. The storm was coming. But this time I wouldn't be the one swept away. The flight home felt endless, the hours stretching out like thin wire. Taut with the anticipation of what was waiting for me. When the wheels touched down in Denver, it was nearly midnight. But the adrenaline in my veins made me feel wired, alert. I drove straight to the cabin. The mountain roads were dark and winding, but they were familiar. Every curve, every dip etched into my memory like a favorite old song. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I just sat in the car for a moment, staring at it. It was still there. Still standing. Weathered, worn, but unmistakably mine. I unlocked the door with my key. And the familiar creak of the hinges almost made my chest ache. The air smelled of pine, dust, and something else. Hope, maybe. I dropped my bag inside and sat down right there on the wooden floor, the way I used to when I was a kid, cross-legged and small but stubborn. It was time to fight back. First thing the next morning, I met with Laura at her office downtown. She was waiting with a thick folder in her hands, her smile grim but determined. "Everything we need is in here," she said, sliding it across the table to me. "The co-ownership agreement, county records, correspondence, and," she paused, her eyes gleaming, "proof that any sale Richard attempted was fraudulent." I flipped through the documents, feeling the strength of it settle in my bones. We had him cornered. "What's the plan?" "Yes. We file an injunction," she said simply. "We stop any transfer of ownership dead in its tracks. And we press charges for attempted fraud." I nodded, the decision already made in my heart. The next week was a whirlwind. Lawyers, court filings, meetings with the county registrar. Richard, true to form, tried to dodge service, ducking calls, ignoring certified letters. But he couldn't outrun the legal system. When the injunction was officially granted, Laura and I popped a bottle of cheap champagne in her kitchen. We laughed. The kind of laugh that's half relief, half victory. "He's going to be furious," Laura said, clinking her glass against mine. "Let him be," I said, smiling into the rim of my glass. "He bet against the wrong person." 2 days later, he showed up at my apartment. He looked disheveled for the first time I could remember. Hair mussed, eyes bloodshot, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt like he'd slept in it. "Catherine, you need to fix this. he barked the moment I opened the door. I leaned casually against the frame, folding my arms. Fix what? Your mistake. You can't do this to me, he snarled, stepping closer like he could intimidate me into submission. You're ruining my life. I didn't flinch. No, Richard. You ruined it yourself. I just stopped letting you drag mine down with you. For the first time I saw it. The crack in his armor. The realization that the old games wouldn't work anymore. You owe me, he shouted, voice raw. I smiled. A slow, steady smile that didn't reach my eyes. No, Richard, I said, voice calm, steady, final. You owe me. And now the law agrees. I closed the door in his face without another word, the solid click of the latch echoing in the hallway. I leaned my back against the door and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in years, maybe ever, felt free. The next morning, Laura texted me a single line. The buyer backed out. The cabin is officially yours again. I sat on my couch staring at those words, the weight of the past few weeks. The past few years. Finally lifting off my shoulders. Richard had underestimated me. He thought he could steal from me, lie to me, break me. But instead, he'd made me stronger. Stronger than I'd ever known I could be. By the time the trial date was set, something inside me had shifted completely. I wasn't doing this out of spite anymore. I wasn't dragging him to court because I wanted revenge. I was doing it because I deserved to protect what was mine. The morning of the hearing, I stood on the courthouse steps, the chilly Oregon air stinging my cheeks, holding a small file folder under my arm, filled with every document, every email, every proof of his betrayal. Felt ready. Not fearless, but grounded. Confident in a way I hadn't felt in years. When Dean walked up, flanked by his lawyer, he barely met my eyes. He looked smaller somehow. Not the man who once laughed at my back or called me ungrateful, but a man crumbling under the weight of his own decisions. Inside, the hearing was brisk. His attorney tried to spin the story, painting it as a misunderstanding. Dean even tried to look pitiful, wringing his hands, slumping in his chair. But the judge wasn't moved. Not when faced with the co-ownership contract, the backdated sales documents, the forged signatures. In under an hour, it was over. The judge ruled the sale void. The cabin would remain fully under my ownership. And Dean would face charges for fraudulent misrepresentation and theft. As we filed out of the courtroom, Dean brushed past me. He muttered, low and bitter, "You ruined me." I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at him. Instead, I stepped outside into the pale winter sunlight and breathed deeply, the cold air filling my lungs, cleansing me from the inside out. Later that week, I drove up to the cabin alone. No Laura this time. No papers to review. No battles left to fight. It was me. And the quiet mountains, standing eternal and patient. The snow had started to fall in soft, heavy flakes, dusting the old wooden porch, layering the evergreens with a shimmering white coat. The world seemed to hold its breath. I walked inside. Everything was just as I remembered. The slight creak of the floorboards under my boots. The familiar worn leather of the armchair by the window. The fireplace, still holding the ghost of our last warm fire. I built a new one that night, fed it slowly, watched as the flames licked higher, crackling, warming the cabin from the inside out. Sitting there, bundled in an old quilt, I realized something. This wasn't just a win over Dean. It wasn't even just about reclaiming the cabin. It was about reclaiming myself. My voice. My worth. The quiet, unshakable knowledge that I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. That I didn't owe anyone my silence. Or my dreams. Dean's betrayal had forced me to grow. To stop waiting for people to treat me the way I deserved. To start demanding it. First from myself. And then from the world. I thought back to the girl who once stayed quiet to keep the peace, who bit her tongue when the people she loved hurt her the most. And I felt a deep, bittersweet pride. She was gone now. In her place sat a woman who had fought for what was hers. And won. The fire crackled low. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering snowflakes against the windows. I pulled the quilt tighter around me and smiled. Not a smile of triumph, but of peace, of freedom, of knowing that the best revenge was never about hurting the people who hurt you. It was about living well without them, building a life so full, so strong, so bright, that their shadows could never touch it again.